It's not uncommon to see disturbing stories about monsters or ghosts on the internet, but some people forget that there is something equally scary: aliens. And in this video, you will understand why you should be very afraid of them. But first, if you're new here, remember to subscribe to the channel. The channel's goal is to get 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we can achieve it. So please sign up. Now let's move on to the first story. I visited an alien zoo with a horrible main attraction. This was a difficult story for me to write, but necessary. I never imagined that I would be given the opportunity to tell my story and speak to my people, even if my communication is indirect, a message transmitted across vast light years on the other side of the galaxy. I am a human being, still recognizable despite all the modifications made to my physical body. I was born on Earth many decades ago, but I was taken from my planet when it was still child, and I have come to terms with the fact that I will never see my home world again. I haven't thought about my fellow human beings in a while. After all, my life has taken me to every corner of the galaxy, where I've met countless exotic aliens and visited extraordinary worlds that would be beyond your wildest dreams. And yet here I am, speaking to the people of Earth and trying to reclaim some of my humanity, because recent events remind me vividly of who I am and where I came from. I'm not going to tell my entire life story, but a brief story is in order to give some context. My early years were normal and surprisingly peaceful when I consider what happened in the period that followed. I was born on a small farm in an isolated rural community. My family wasn't rich, but we were happy and secure. Unfortunately, I only have fleeting memories of my parents and younger siblings. Images burned into my brain of birthday parties, playing in green fields and bedtime stories. Those were the good times before I realized how vulnerable we really were. When I was young, I looked up at the night sky and distant stars with a childlike sense of wonder. I dreamed of one day becoming an explorer and visiting these unknown worlds. But I could never have imagined the horrors and dangers that existed out there in the cold vastness of space. My childhood ended one summer night just after my 9th birthday. That's when the Astros came after me and my family. I remember a little about the frenzied attack on our house. I suppose I forced the traumatic experience deep into my subconscious. Anyway, I remember the chaos, white lights and screams, as my mother and father tried in vain to protect their terrified from this inexplicable threat. But there was nothing they could do in the face of advanced and all-powerful alien technology. I was trying to hide under my bed when the window was broken and the room was flooded with blinding light. Then I lost control of my own body, being dragged out the window by an invisible force and out into the dark night. And soon after, I lost consciousness. Now I was a prisoner of the ruthless Astri, a cruel and sadistic alien race who kidnapped and countless human beings over many decades. My entire family was taken that night, and I never saw any of them again. Contrary to popular belief, the Astri do not sweet all its human victims. It's true that they built an entire culture and quasi-religion around their cruelty and cruel ways. And few adult humans will leave their prison cells. Are a different matter, however. The Astri enjoy retraining young people and selling them to various other nefarious actors as slave labor. That would be my destiny. I can only assume that my brother and sister were also enslaved, but they must have been sent to a different training camp than the hell I ended up in, because I never saw them again. As for my parents, I fear they probably suffered horrible in the hands of those monsters. The next 6 years of my life are not a time I like to remember. My training at the hands of the Astri was typically brutal, with discipline and complete obedience being instilled in us by constant beatings and electric shock collars. It was hell, pure and simple. I soon realized that there was no hope of escape and that it was almost impossible to fight the brutes. Therefore, my only focus was survival. I lived it while many others didn't, and even now, after all these years, I'm still not sure how I feel about it. Once my training was complete, I was sold to a rogue mining consortium and forced to work on a mineral-rich asteroid located in the Sirius system. The conditions were almost as brutal and probably even more dangerous than at the Astri Training Center, as I worked in the mines alongside thousands of others, some human, some other species. Our robotic supervisors dole out savage punishments for even the smallest offenses, and safety protocols were virtually non-existent. As a result, workers died regularly and our life expectancy was limited. I expected to meet my end on that godforsaken rock, but then salvation came from a most unexpected source. I was resting between shifts, lying on my hard bunk in the workers' barracks when all hell broke loose, when suddenly I heard several explosions and heavy. I jumped off my cot and ran around the barracks to find out what the hell was going on. At first, I suspected that a slave rebellion was underway, and my heart sank because I knew that the consortium's automated defense systems had massacred us en masse. However, when I looked up at the dark sky, I saw machines war descending into the asteroid's orbit, neutralizing the mine's defenses with lasers and missiles. The battle was short and one-sided, with the attacking forces soon overwhelming the and taking control of the facility. All the surviving workers were gathered and approached by a representative of the conquering forces. I admit I was cynical and didn't have much hope. I thought the invaders were simply another gang of that they would simply sell us to the highest bidder. But I admit that I was surprised when we came across a tall, thin alien with fair skin and large oval eyes who looked at us with compassion and empathy. When the alien spoke, his voice was soft and almost like a song, and he calmly explained that he was a representative of the Galactic Confederation, sent here to shut down the illegal mining operation and free us. That alien's name is Gabriel. He saved my life that day, and I've been with him ever since. Let me try to explain my situation after the liberation of the Sirius slave mine. I was only 15 years old, but I was forced to grow up quickly. I have known nothing but violence and cruelty since the kidnapping of Earth, and there is no doubt that the that I endured had a significant impact on my fragile psyche. I assumed the galaxy was a place of chaos and violence, and so I didn't know what to make of this Galactic Confederation. Were they genuine about their stated mission to fight intergalactic aggressors and end their reign of terror? I admit I was very suspicious. They told us we were free, but what did that really mean? The Confederacy couldn't send me back to Earth, and even if they could, why would I want to go? My family was missing, presumed I had nowhere to go back, and besides, how could I go back to a normal life on Earth after everything I'd been through, and with what I now knew about the universe? I was at a loss as to what to do with my newfound freedom, but I think Gabriel liked me because he offered me a position as his assistant, one that I would eventually accept. At the time, I had little idea what this job would involve, but it was clear that Gabriel's life was interesting. The alien was a member of the Malik race, an advanced and cultured alien species that lived in peace for millennia until they were forced to take on in self-defense after a brutal attack on his home planet by the Astros. The Malik were one of the founding members of the Galactic Confederation, whose goal was to restore peace and justice to the galaxy, and Gabriel served as a diplomat for that organization, which meant he traveled through space in his own starship, meeting all kinds of exotic and bizarre alien races. I've been at Gabriel's side for decades, traveling back and forth across the galaxy using the vital network of wormholes that allow our ships to traverse between the stars. It may seem like a strange relationship, but over the years, Gabriel and I became close companions and built a lasting friendship. So this is my story, and explains how I came to this bizarre but somewhat privileged position. Over the many years of my service, I began to think of myself as a citizen of the galaxy rather than a refugee from a backwater planet on the edge of known space. But as I said, something significant occurred that changed my outlook and made me reconsider my bond with humanity. And this is the story I want to tell you. I imagine you're all familiar with the concept of a zoo, even if you have never visited one. I remember going to the local zoo with my family before our abduction. I imagine they still exist on Earth, although they may have changed a bit in the many years since. I remember the excitement I shared with my siblings during our visit when we saw exotic, majestic animals on the other side of the world. However, the experience was tinged with sadness, at least on my part. I was upset to see these animals trapped in cages, while I always imagined this magnificent vacation roaming freely in the wild. I told my father how I felt, and he explained that many species were endangered in the wild and therefore safer here in captivity. That made sense, I suppose, but it still didn't feel right. In any case, the galactic equivalent of a zoo is something considerably larger and more advanced than anything we have on Earth. Can you imagine a small moon orbiting a gas giant that has been specifically adapted for this purpose, with vast biodomes and artificial habitats designed and equipped to accommodate all manner of bizarre and unique creatures from every corner of known space? As you can imagine, a venue like this is exorbitantly expensive to set up and run, and so only the richest and most important individuals can afford to attend, often traveling many light years to visit the largest and most extravagant zoological facility in the galaxy. Only one race has the wealth and ability to build and manage such an enterprise: the Kalmar. What can I say about the Kalmar and the highly influential position they occupy within the galactic hierarchy? Well, they're an aquatic squid-like species that has long since abandoned the aquatic world where they evolved, instead traveling through space in powerful colony ships and inhabiting vast space stations scattered across the stars. The Kalmar have become obscenely rich and powerful due to their control of the wormhole network that connects inhabited systems and serves as the sole means of communication, trade, exploration, and military expeditions in the absence of faster-than-light travel. The Kalmar control the entrances to these wormholes and never fail to collect their toll. Furthermore, the Kalmar are a pragmatic people who will do business with any species with money, but who also refuse to enter into any formal alliances or coalitions. Therefore, they remain officially neutral in the conflict between the Galactic Confederation and the Astri Empire, allowing both sides to use their network, albeit at a substantial price. The Grand Galactic Zoo is a vanity project for the Kalmar royal family, allowing them to demonstrate their vast wealth and extravagance. So, why did I end up visiting this place? Simply put, Gabriel was invited to the grand reopening of the facility after a substantial renovation, and he was required to attend, lest the Kalmar take offense and limit our access to their crucial network of wormholes. That's the complicated nature of intergalactic diplomacy. I pondered these questions as our needle ship descended into orbit around the gaseous planet, and admired its vast atmospheric rings and ribbons as we approached the icy ball of rock that was our destination. The ship's autopilot slowly and carefully made its way to the docking station that was built into the rocky surface of the moon. The structure didn't look like much from orbit, but I remembered that most of the facility was located below ground, inside the small moon's hollow core. While the AI took care of the navigation, Gabriel and I were left to observe the scene from the observation deck and consider the finer details of our mission. I looked into my companion's dark oval eyes and felt as if I could read his thoughts. We had been working together for a long time, and there were few secrets between us. "Are you worried about the mission?" I asked, more like a statement of fact than a question. "I am," was Gabriel's limited response. "But why?" I continued. "Surely this visit is nothing more than a diplomatic kindness, or is there something I am forgetting?" Gabriel nodded his oval head before responding. "You are right, my old friend. On paper, this is simply a visit to curry favor with the Kalmar royal family, to show them due respect and praise their bizarre creation. But I fear the situation is more complex. Relations between the Kalmar and our confederation are tense. We have pressured your government to cease its support of the Astri Empire, but with little success. My instincts tell me that our Kalmar friends might have a nasty surprise in store for us." The alien said nothing more, but his prophetic sent a shiver down my spine. Regardless, our ship docked without incident, allowing us to disembark and enter the luxurious welcome center that marked the entrance to the mega zoo. As expected, Kalmar spared no expense in building the center, blending the traditional and modern seamlessly, with finely carved marble pillars alongside 3D holographic images of various exotic creatures housed within the zoo. I stood in awe for a moment, admiring the grandeur of the scene, but Gabriel drew my attention to a glass window above us, behind which was a tank of dark, murky water. We watched in silence as a dark shape emerged from the water, swimming up to the glass so we could see its enormous, intimidating form. I took a deep breath as I witnessed the Kalmar in all its terrifying glory. At least 20 feet in diameter, with long, thick tentacles dangling, vast eyes the size of dinner plates, and a sharp beak big enough to swallow my head whole. The Kalmar was like something out of a nightmare to my human eyes, and yet it was a member of an advanced and powerful species that demanded respect. Therefore, I swallowed my disgust and fear and followed Gabriel's lead, bowing respectfully, calm in a symbolic gesture. The squid-like alien responded by black ink to the glass, which Gabriel assured me was a good sign. With this bizarrely concluded, the alien swam away from the glass and disappeared back into the murky water, leaving us still standing inside the welcome center and awaiting further instructions. I wasn't surprised by the Kalmar's quick departure. Gabriel gave me a crash course in their culture before they landed. In addition to their greed and desire for power, the Kalmar were also surprisingly xenophobic and wanted little to do with other species. The brief greeting we received was the best we could hope for, and the logistics of our excursion would be left to his robotic minions. As if on cue, an automated communications drone stopped overhead, speaking in friendly tones through its attached speakers. "Welcome, esteemed guest, to the grand reopening of the largest zoo in the galaxy. My name is Unit 1642, and I have been personally appointed by His Royal Highness Salak the Great to guide you through his proudest attraction." His welcome was addressed to Gabriel, of course, and my companion responded in a typically diplomatic manner. "Please convey our sincere thanks to His Majesty for his kind invitation. It is truly a great honor to attend this prestigious event." Knowing Gabriel as I did, I realized those words would have been difficult for him to speak. My companion had little time for Salak the Great, the tyrannical leader of the Kalmar. There were many places he would rather be than here, but Gabriel was a talented diplomat and knew how to speak the language. I was a different matter, however. The aerial drone turned to look at me, examining me suspiciously within its built-in cameras. There was a short delay before he spoke again, and I swore I could hear contempt in his previously emotionless robotic voice. "Is this human a member of your group?" he asked. I was surprised by the question, but fortunately Gabriel answered firmly and without hesitation. "Yes, this gentleman will accompany me on the tour. I hope this is not a problem?" The robot lingered for a moment, perhaps relaying the information to its masters upstairs. A tension-filled pause followed before he finally responded coolly, saying, "As you wish, Ambassador." A thin smile appeared on Gabriel's lips like slits as he said, "Very good. Now shall we proceed?" "Not yet, Mr. Ambassador," replied the drone. "We are waiting for a second part." "Another party?" Gabriel responded uncertainly, as he had clearly not been informed of this. "Yes," confirmed the drone. "Ah, here they come now." We turned sharply to look back at the docking pier, and my entire body froze when I saw the four creatures approaching, their sharp claws hitting the metal floor as they came. The other group was Astri, a family it seemed. Father was nearly 7 feet tall, his red scales glowing, and his yellow reptilian eyes burning when he saw us. I noticed the scars visible on his tough skin and countless decorations stuck to his elegant uniform, and I imagined that Astro was an experienced warrior of some reputation. The woman walking beside him was just a little smaller and had the same mean appearance. I assumed it was his wife or concubine, and behind her were 2 young men, both from masculine. They were teenagers, and so I figured they had already gone through the hellish Agoji-style training that all Astri were forced to pass. It is no exaggeration to say that I stood frozen in place in terror as I watched the Astri approach. Horrible memories flooded my head again as I remembered the hell of my kidnapping and the inflicted on me in the Astri slave camp. I tried to push this trauma to the back of my mind for the next few years, but seeing these monsters in bone unleashed a wave of pent-up trauma. "What is the meaning of this?" Gabriel exclaimed, his normally cold exterior suddenly disappearing. The robot didn't hesitate to respond. "Ambassador, let me introduce you to Admiral Tas, commander of the Astri 7th Fleet. He is accompanied by his wife and 2. They will join us on today's ride." "They didn't tell me anything about it," Gabriel protested. His Majesty believed that this meeting should be a surprise for both parties. He hopes that this occasion may be an opportunity for reconciliation between the Confederacy and the Empire, and perhaps the seeds of peace may be sown on this day. Gabriel shook his head but made no comment. Clearly this was the Kalmar trick he had anticipated, but he was caught off guard by their boldness. Judging by the angry clicks emitted by the Astri and the hateful end that they pitched me in private, I figured they were pretty unhappy with the situation as well, but there was nothing either side could do. This was neutral ground, and no one could risk disturbing the Kalmar, lest access to crucial wormholes. For better or worse, we would all have to play their twisted game. The robotic drone guided us to what was described as a mobile viewing platform, essentially a transparent, floating, bubble-like aircraft that would take us through the various exhibits and enclosures, allowing us to remain nearly invisible as we observed the animals up close. The two opposing groups shared the same observation platform, and the tension within that cocoon was intense. I saw Admiral Astri staring at me, his claws snapping and eyes burning. No doubt he imagined the horrible ways he had treated me. Would if I had half the chance. I was scared, of course, but also very angry, and I confess that fantasies of revenge crossed my mind. Gabriel remained calm, however, calming me and reassuring me that I would remain safe by his side. Our journey to the depths of the excavated moon was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I cannot deny that. The vast size of the alien zoo was almost impossible to quantify. Entire ecosystems and biospheres were contained within, built specifically to accommodate diverse species originating from many different worlds. I could spend hours describing all the bizarre creatures we encountered during our descent, but I will focus on 3 encounters that are directly related to my account. The first incident occurred when our ship entered the porous membrane of a desert-type ecosystem, a hot, sandy sphere that appeared desolate and virtually devoid of life. Our cocoon hovered in the air for a while, my skin baking in the simulated sun as I looked out at what felt like miles of white, almost pristine sand. It would be easy to forget that we were inside an artificial environment rather than a real desert of natural origins. We sat there and waited, although I couldn't say what, and our robotic guide wouldn't say. Boredom soon set in, particularly with the 2 young Astri, who were apparently obsessed with adrenaline rushes and violence. Predators were certainly his favorites. I thought any creature inhabiting this habitat must be a recluse, but I soon learned otherwise. I took a step back, my jaw dropping as I looked at the enormous worm-like creature with thick yellow skin, easily 100 feet long, rising from the desert sands, its eyeless head and beak-like mouth going straight to our stationary pod. I screamed in terror as the mighty beast attacked, biting in an effort to grab our cocoon within its mighty maw. I was sure it would swallow us whole, but when the monster tried to do so, it suffered a sudden shock, no doubt falling victim to a hidden, non-lethal defense system. The beast retreated, screaming very loudly as it moved away from our group and returned to the sands below, burying itself deeply and leaving us in peace. "My God," I exclaimed, looking at Gabriel and finding him typically calm and composed. If the beast's attack scared him, he didn't let it show. However, our attention was soon drawn to the Astri family when a disturbing and violent incident occurred. From what I could tell, one of the young Astri flinched whenever the giant worm attacked, which his parents considered an unacceptable sign of weakness. Gabriel and I could only watch as the Astri boy's father angrily protested at his son, while his mother stepped savagely, hitting the boy with her clawed hands clenched into fists. Meanwhile, the boy's brother simply stood by and watched as his brother was, no doubt relieved that he was not suffering. I shuddered as I witnessed the savage punishment that reminded me of the many beatings I received in the slave camp. This was a harsh reminder that the Astri were often as brutal to their own as they were to their alien captives. Gabriel no doubt shared my disgust as he placed his long-fingered hand on my shoulder in an attempt to comfort me. Meanwhile, our robotic guide waited for the punishment to end before delivering his light-hearted briefing. The worm gives Orkin's horror of the desert world. As you can imagine, my masters had considerable difficulty obtaining this specimen. It will never be fully domesticated, of course, but we have spared no expense in installing state-of-the-art security measures to ensure the safety of our guests. It seemed like there was nothing left to see in this biosphere, so we moved on. The next habitat was a jungle environment, one of suffocating humidity and thick vegetation, all under an artificial replica of double suns. This was a place I had never been, and hope I never will be. And yet the place was eerily familiar to me, and being here confirmed my worst fears. Welcome to our artificial construction of the Astri homeworld. We hope the Admiral appreciates the level of detail, including the authentic vegetation and organisms. The Astri man grunted disdainfully, which was perhaps the best reaction anyone could have hoped for. Our group descended beneath the foliage, allowing us a closer view at ground level. Among the exotic creatures we saw was a large, red, scorpion-like beast with a sharp, dripping stinger on its tail. The beast was perhaps the size of a bull, but it ran across the forest floor on surprisingly light feet. As we watched from above, suddenly the beast tore up the ground, striking with its stinger and impaling an animal that looked somewhat like a deer, except with a horn on its nose and 3 pairs of eyes. The wounded animal fought desperately, but ultimately to no avail as the venom from the scorpion's stinger entered its veins and paralyzed its body. His grim task complete, the hunter dragged his prey to a narrow cave entrance that I guessed was his lair. Queen Scorpius will lay her eggs inside the his victim is still alive. Our guide explained, once their young hatch, they feast on their... He paused briefly, turning to the Astri family. But you already know that, don't you? I looked at the Astrian brothers, still bleeding from the beating he took, the second physically, but undoubtedly psychologically affected. None of them flinched upon witnessing the hunt. They knew better than to do that. However, I could only imagine what was going through their minds at that moment. No doubt they were recalling the horrors of their Agog training, when young Astri are thrown into the deepest jungle and are forced to fight, and the woman to survive. More than likely, the brothers already had siblings who did not experience this brutal. Maybe they have them with your own claws. I was afraid to think of such horrors. As we left the replica of the Astri homeworld, our guide continued speaking in his mechanical voice, hinting at the nature of the upcoming exhibit. It is truly a pleasure to present the main attraction of our renovated zoological facilities. The drone turned its cameras on me before continuing, making me incredibly uncomfortable. Your human pet may find this exhibit quite familiar, he said, directing his unpleasant comment at Gabriel. I swallowed hard, swallowing down my anger as I feared what we were about to witness. Our pod quickly descended through the purpose-built tunnels, diving deep into the moon's core. Eventually, we arrived at a huge underground chamber that must have been many kilometers in diameter. Our ship penetrates the membrane that surrounded the enormous exhibit, and I came face to face with an environment that brought back many memories. Within this core excavated from an alien moon, the Akelmar somehow managed to construct a vast ecosystem consisting of a small but substantial tropical island, surrounded on all sides by water, all contained within a protective bubble that projected an artificial sky and sun. As our power descended and approached, I was surprised to observe the green vegetation, the yellow sands, and the clear blue sea, all of which seemed supposedly familiar. And my worst fears came true when the guide spoke again. Here is our perfect recreation of planet Earth, home of the uncivilized and primitive Homo sapiens. Shall we take a closer look? He didn't wait for a response before directing our small craft to the island. I was still in shock, and when I looked into Gabriel's oval eyes, I saw an unusual anger seeping through his normally cold exterior. I could tell he was seething with rage at Kalmar's latest trick. Soon our pod hovered over a clearing on the island where we witnessed a group of human hunters with primitive spears and bows as they chased their prey, a wild boar, through the tall grass. I watched as spears and arrows flew through the air. Most missed, but at least one of the projectiles hit its target, distorting the pig and bringing its charge to a halt. We all watched and listened as the boar screamed in pain before 2 hunters approached, one holding the beast by its horns while the other cut its throat and ended the creature's life. I heard a cry of triumph from the other hunters, watching as emaciated and scantily clad humans approached to claim their prize, their tired eyes burning with hunger as they did so. Thank you to our friends Astri for delivering these beautiful specimens, our robotic guide suddenly blurted out. I turned to the Astri family just as the Admiral gave me a hateful look, a sadistic smile etched into his fanged mouth. Of course the Astros were involved in this atrocity, I told myself. They consider us nothing more than animals, and it would give them perverse pleasure to see human beings reduced to such a low state, mere exhibits in an alien zoo, trapped many light years away from their home planet, and it only got worse. Soon our group flew to the center of the island, where we saw a small village of bamboo and wooden huts built in a small clearing within the forest. This was certainly the main human settlement on the island, where my fellow Homo sapiens were reduced to living a Stone Age existence. We stood above the village for some time, watching a tragic scene unfold below us. I watched with wide eyes as a young woman cried while carrying a baby clearly from his hut, and walked slowly to the small swallow pit dug in the ground right on the edge of the village. My heart almost broke when the mother kissed her son on the forehead before carefully lowering the body into the awaiting grave, all while the other residents looked on in solemn silence. I noticed how there were many other graves of various sizes next to it, all marked by crude but poignant wooden crosses. It was Gabriel who broke the silence, directing his accusatory questions at our guide. "Your masters certainly have the ability to stop the disease. Can't they cure humans of their illnesses?" "Clear," replied the drone. "But we choose not to intervene in the ecosystem unless there is no other option. We believe in letting nature take its course." "I understand," Gabriel responded without further comment. It seemed like we had stayed in the same place for a long time, because the villagers eventually noticed our presence. Some of the young men reacted angrily, grabbing their bows and arrows at our pod. Most missed or fell short, and the few arrows that hit us ricocheted harmlessly off the cocoon's exterior, all while the Astri laughed cruelly in open mockery. "Time to move on," the guide declared, as our vessel rose and flew south. Soon we were hovering over a sandy beach on the edge of the island, watching a dugout canoe return from swallows, and the people on board unload a small number of fish from homemade nets. I imagined fishing as another source of food for the imprisoned community, barely surviving as hunter-gatherers. Everything went without incident until two young men emerged from beyond the tree line and ran across the hot sands to the now unattended canoe. The two were just a boy and a girl in their teens. Maybe they were passionate lovers. In any case, they seemed to have a pre-prepared plan to steal the small boat, for in an instant they were on board and headed out into the calm blue waters. I saw an older fisherman on the beach shouting desperately to the couple, telling them to turn around and go home, but they didn't listen. Instead, they rowed faster as they left the island behind. "The village elders warned their youth never to sail beyond the designated limit," explained our guide, "but unfortunately, the humans are undisciplined and stubborn. In this situation, we need to intervene, but the scenario presents an exciting opportunity." I felt a shiver run down my spine when I heard those words. I didn't know what would come next, but I figured it couldn't be good news for the young couple trying to escape the cage. Out of nowhere, a rogue wave rose from the previously calm waters, an event that was surely triggered by Kalmar's hidden security systems. The small canoe didn't stand a chance against the powerful wave, and their boat capsized, throwing the two teenagers into the sea. But that was just the beginning. Suddenly, and without, our pod fell from the sky and plunged beneath the waves, and then we were submerged beneath the water, sealed inside as we stared out into the clear waters, watching the two teenagers kicking wildly as they struggled to stay afloat. And then I heard the excited clicks of the Astri group as the sadistic aliens pointed at the beasts emerging from the depths. My heart almost stopped as I watched the giant fish swim up, their huge mouths opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth and their dark eyes filled with raw hunger. "Mako, great white and tiger shark," the guide announced coldly. "Alpha predators of Earth's oceans. Now we will see these magnificent hunters in action." I was frozen in horror as I watched the trio of sharks ascend rapidly. It was obvious who their target was, but I had no power to intervene. The great white attacked the boy first, biting his legs and almost them on the knees. The boy screamed as his hot water filled the water, and the feeding frenzy began in earnest. The girl tried to reach out to help her boyfriend, but he was soon pulled below the surface. A moment later, she was bitten in the torso by the tiger shark, nearly ripped in two as her eyes filled with shock and pain. Meanwhile, the Mako fought the larger great white over the boy's limp body, off one of his arms as the boy continued his futile struggle. Before long, the scene descended into chaos, the sharks greedily feasting on human with a primal savagery that reminded me that, in this place at least, humans were not at the top of the food chain. I fell over, retching as I felt like I was going to vomit. I looked at Gabriel and saw a terrible sadness in his eyes, now full of expression. But the Astro's reaction was the opposite, as the twisted reptilian family snorted and snapped their claws in excitement as they celebrated the shower that we had just witnessed. Fortunately, the hellish show ended soon after as our pod returned to the surface and left the nightmarish display behind. To his credit, Gabriel maintained his professional demeanor as he thanked the Kalmar guide for the tour and was even cordial with the cruel admiral and his family. But I could tell how angry my companion Malak really was, for clearly this entire visit had been designed to humiliate him. As for my own feelings, well, we soon returned to our ship and left the Dark Moon behind, but I knew I wouldn't forget the horrors I witnessed inside that hellish alien zoo. I couldn't sleep that night, lying on my back and staring at the dark ceiling as the horrific images of the feeding frenzy remained trapped in my brain. I think it was better that I couldn't sleep because it probably saved my life. Suddenly, the silence inside my cabin was broken when I heard a soft but clearly audible hissing sound. I jumped out of my bed, catching a fleeting image out of the corner of my eye as something small but fast skittered across the floor of my cabin. I screamed in shock, jumping up on my bunk as I frantically scanned the room for the mysterious creature. But in an instant, the intruder was in my bed with me, just inches from my body. Through the darkness, I saw a thin, snake-like creature with red eyes and sharp fangs dripping with venom. I stood frozen in terror, seeing my cabin door open, but thinking it was surely too late. The snake hissed and leaped. Its fangs extended as it prepared to inject its venom into my veins. But at the last moment, a long hand reached out from the darkness, grabbing the leaping snake in the air and breaking its spine with a single powerful action. I was still shaking almost uncontrollably when I looked up to see my savior, Gabriel. The alien examined the creature in its hands for a brief moment before throwing it to the ground in disgust. And then he turned his attention to me, ensuring I was and comforting me after the traumatic experience of nearly. After I recovered from the shock, Gabriel and I retreated to the ship's canteen, where the AI computer prepared a mild sedative to calm my nerves. When I finally felt confident enough to speak, I asked the following questions. That creature, where did it come from? Is she an escapee from the zoo? I knew this was unlikely, but I didn't much like the alternative. Gabriel hesitated, appearing deep in thought for a moment, but he finally responded. I don't think so. The animal is an Astri viper, purposefully bred and trained to targeted. It will be impossible to trace the attempt back to the Admiral, of course, but I believe he was insulted by your presence and wanted to take you to send a message. I felt a new pang of panic and a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, once again reminding me of how close I had come to suffering an accident. Excruciating. I didn't know what to say in that tension-filled moment, and so I waited until Gabriel spoke again. The Confederation leadership believes that we can still work with the Kalmar and negotiate with the Astros. I fear they are shamefully naive about this. We must redouble our efforts to defeat this evil coalition. The alien gave me a meaningful look through its large oval eyes before continuing. We have traveled together for many years, old friend, but I feel I must now ask you a difficult question. Do you miss your people? Is it your desire to return to Earth? I was shocked by the directness of Gabriel's question, although I admit I've thought about the matter a little over the years and soon came up with an answer. No, I said firmly. Indeed, I would be a stranger to my own people if I returned. My place is here, by your side. Gabriel nodded his big head and seemed satisfied with my answer. And yet, you still care about your people, he added. I could see that from your reaction today. I thought about the disgusting exhibit at the alien zoo and realized he was right. I couldn't bear to see my fellow human beings treated this way, and I wouldn't forget what the Astri did to me and my family. I felt that Gabriel would present an alternative proposal and would not be disappointed. You know, we already have a legion of freed humans fighting as part of our forces. Soon, we will contact the citizens of Earth and ask them to join our alliance. I see you playing a key role in these conversations. In the meantime, I believe we have an opportunity here. You have a fascinating and poignant story to tell, old friend. We have the means to convey your message to the people of Earth. This would not be strictly in accordance with the Confederation's first contact protocol, but I believe we can make an exception in this case. And so here it is, my story, and all. Much of my life has been marked by tragedy and trauma, but also by hope and redemption. But my message to the Earth is this: you have been living in a dark cave for too long, and it is time to see the light. The universe is a dangerous place, full of threats almost beyond human comprehension. But we are not alone in this fight. It's coming, whether we like it or not, and it's time to decide whose side we're on. I'm an infantry soldier in a war against an alien race. This is my story. This is a message for the citizens of planet Earth. I am speaking to all races and creeds, to people of all nations and religions. Our little differences and disputes, they mean nothing now. We must unite for a common cause or face the prospect of annihilation. My name is Jamie Wallace, and I'm a soldier in a intergalactic reality that our Earth-based governments have gone to great lengths to hide from the public. Well, I'm here to tell you the truth. Your leaders have been lying to all of you for decades and are not keeping you safe. My story is shared by countless thousands of people, an invisible army of survivors launched in a fight we never asked for, against an enemy we didn't know existed. But despite all the horrors I've been through, I'm one of the lucky ones. After my abduction, I was thrown into the middle of a prisoner revolt, a rebellion that saved me from a hideous and violent. But it was a case of out of the pot and into the fire, as I joined a mob of desperate prisoners and fought against our alien captors, a monstrous and sadistic reptilian race known as the Astri. Our rebellion was successful as we fought and the entire ship's crew, made up of soldiers and Astri, before taking control of the bridge. But the victory came at a high price, as dozens of human and alien prisoners during the battle, including our leaders, a long-suffering but philosophical human named Gideon and his mysterious alien friend named Abel. Unfortunately, these two were the only ones who knew how to pilot the Astri ship, and so we survivors were trapped in deep space, having transmitted a desperate SOS message that we thought no one would receive. The following days were a time of fear and despair, as we divided the survivors into two groups, one of which attempted in vain to operate the Astri ship's controls, a task that proved impossible due to our limited knowledge of its advanced technology. Meanwhile, the second group was tasked with exploring the massive slave ship Astri to find the food and water we needed to keep our band alive. Natasha and I were assigned to this second group. We met during the madness of the revolt aboard the slave ship. She saved my life, and we fought side by side, developing a close bond in the process. Natasha was a brave young woman, without a doubt. She fought and survived against all odds, but Natasha was a prisoner of the Astri for several months before the rebellion and suffered indescribable physical and psychological in their hands. The horrors she suffered changed Natasha. She developed a deep hatred for the Astri and wanted to see her entire race exterminated. I could understand where her anger was coming from, but it scared me to see how far she had fallen. Unfortunately, our exploration of the massive Astri transport ship only exacerbated her anger, as well as mine, as we discovered even more evidence of Astri's atrocities. In the dark and winding corridors, and in the multiple chambers we found many more victims, some human and others members of various alien races. Some of them were already strapped to metal gurneys, with their ribs open and their internal organs removed. Natasha sternly told me how the Astri liked to perform unnecessary surgeries on their captives without using anesthesia. Other victims were mutilated in equally horrific ways, with their heads and limbs removed with surgical precision. Sometimes their dismembered corpses were carefully stitched together into grotesque displays. Astri art was what Natasha called it. But even worse were the living victims, those on the brink of who had been purposely kept alive by the Astri to prolong their. We saw human beings who were almost unrecognizable as such, their bodies desecrated and mutilated in ways I could never have imagined. I witnessed heads of their bodies, their brains still functioning as eyes filled with madness scanned the room. They tried to scream but were unable to as their tongues were removed or their mouths sewn shut. But Astro's macabre experiments didn't end there. As we explored deeper into the innards of the spacecraft, Natasha and I witnessed new horrors, abominations resulting from the enemy's twisted science, human bodies and stitched together with those of alien species. These poor bastards clung to life but had no understanding of what had been done to them, screaming in horror and unimaginable agony when we found them. There was only one thing we could do for these victims of end your misery. We went from cell to cell, those who begged for the final relief from his existence. When it was all over, we were both disgusted but also seething with rage. If I had had a live Astri before me at that moment, I would have happily inflicted and violence to her, making her suffer as she sought revenge on behalf of her many victims. We found enough supplies to keep our group alive, but although we had enough food and water, we had no idea how long the power and life support systems would last, and so each passing hour was marked by almost unbearable tension. But then, after several days adrift in deep space, we saw a needle-shaped ship appear on the bridge's monitors, the control panels suddenly coming to life as the ship's sensors detected the approaching craft. I vividly remember the look of cold terror in Natasha's eyes as we watched the smaller ship dock with ours. You must understand that we had no idea who was aboard the spaceship and suspected it was an Astri ship bringing an assault force to reclaim their property and punish us, the rebel hijackers. Natasha gripped her pistol tightly, the fear in her eyes replaced by stern defiance as she turned to me to give her orders, a fiery intensity entering her voice as she spoke. If it's Astro, we'll fight them to the last man. But promise me that, Jamie. If the bastards are going to take us over, just put a bullet in my head. I'm not going back to the cages. Never. I looked into her intense eyes and knew she was serious, and frankly, I couldn't blame her. I made no effort to dissuade Natasha from her desperate plan. I just nodded yes. Within minutes, we had mobilized our entire ramshackle army, hastily building barricades on the dock and arming ourselves with. Astri recovered while we waited for the intruders to arrive. I felt a rush of adrenaline when the mysterious ship docked with a heavy metallic sound. Moments later, the airlock was sealed before the shutter door slowly opened. I kept my finger on the trigger, ready for whatever horror came on the other side. I think we all expected a squad of Astri stormtroopers to breach the breach. I'm just relieved that no one hit the trigger and opened fire prematurely, because the only being that emerged from the airlock was not an Astro, far from it. The figure that came out was not a human, but neither was it a reptilian with red scales that would have marked him as an enemy. The human was tall, thin, and about 2 meters tall. His skin was pale and completely hairless, although he wore dark robes to cover his elongated body. Its ovoid head held 2 large, dark eyes that examined us with fearless curiosity. When his mouth opened, he spoke to us in a song-like voice, and somehow we all understood his words without the need for a translator. "Citizens of the Earth, I come in peace," he said as he held up his 4-fingered hands in a passive gesture. "My name is Adriel, and I am a representative of the Galactic Confederation. I am and I come to you as a friend." Natasha and I look at each other, exchanging glances as we consider our next action. It was possible this was a trick, but I didn't believe it. The being before us seemed peaceful and genuine, so I decided to trust him. Slowly and carefully, I lowered my weapon before ordering my comrades to do the same. Natasha seemed reluctant to comply, her finger still on the trigger, and a fiery intensity still present in her dark eyes. I had to repeat my request and give her a stern look before she finally complied. The alien, who introduced himself as Uriel, shaped his slit-shaped mouth into what could have been a smile before saying, "My new friends, I cordially invite you aboard our ship, where we will provide you with subsistence and medical attention. Once your people are rested, we can discuss our next steps." There was still some reluctance between us, and so I led the way, guarding my weapon and walking toward the strange being, smiling as I greeted my savior and entered into a new covenant. Our rescuers were true to their word and provided us with clean clothing and food adapted to our needs, giving us time to rest and wash, and providing medical assistance to anyone who needed it. The interior of his spaceship contrasted sharply with that of the Astri. Instead of dark, winding corridors, we were treated to aesthetically pleasing colors and lights, and instead of chambers and prison cells, we were greeted with comfortable cabins and friendly aliens of various species working in unison for a common cause. This was the Galactic Confederation, the antidote to the cruel and twisted empire of the Astros. Natasha and I were recognized as the leaders of our small group and were invited to a meeting in what appeared to be a conference room located in the bowels of the ship. Seated around a circular table with an assortment of exotic and bizarre aliens. The being called Uriel was present and appeared to preside over the meeting, but he was the only one of his kind present. The rest of the motley group included a werewolf-like creature with 6 eyes, the same breed I encountered during the rebellion. Next to the werewolf sat a small, stocky being, covered in thick brown hair and wide, wrong eyes, and most bizarre of all was a black eel-like creature contained in a 6-foot-long exoskeleton, as it presumably could not survive outside its natural aquatic environment. Our alien hosts provided us with electronic devices that we inserted into our ears, allowing us to understand what was being said and communicate with our new allies. Uriel opened the discussion by welcoming Natasha and me as he congratulated us on our victory aboard the Astri ship. Your successful rebellion dealt a blow to the enemy, but did not significantly reduce their ability to operate within your solar system. The problem is here. He tapped his long fingers on a control panel to reveal a holographic display in the center of the table. Suddenly I saw a representation of a gas giant that I recognized as Jupiter, and noticed the smaller rocky satellites orbiting the planet, which were certainly its moons. Uriel zoomed in on one particular moon, a rock that was supposed to be uninhabited, but as the image became clearer, I noticed the ugly metal structure embedded in the moon's surface. The Astri Alpha facility, its operating base for this system located on the moon that Earthlings call Europa. We recently deployed a substantial flotilla in an attempt to destroy this base, but Astro detected our attack and deployed countermeasures to destroy our fleet in orbit. We understand that Earth-based governments also made an attempt against the base using a diplomatic mission as cover for a biological attack. This operation also ended in failure, and human leaders on Earth have since submitted to the Astri pirates, paying homage to the enemy by handing over their own citizens for mutilation and... My jaw dropped when Natasha and I exchanged a look of shock and disgust. We had heard rumors of government complicity in Astri's atrocities, but now the terrible truth had been revealed. It is clear that another conventional attack will not be successful. Uriel continued. Therefore, we must resort to unconventional tactics. The holographic image suddenly changed, showing what I imagined to be a 3D image of the base's interior, revealing elevators, tunnels, and chambers deep below the moon's surface. Our allies take considerable risks to bring us these schemes. We have identified the command center that coordinates the base's orbital defense systems. If we neutralize this system, we will be able to attack the deep space facility with impunity. He paused to zoom in, focusing on a chamber located deep below the ground. This is our target. It can't be achieved in orbit, but we have a secret against which the Astri cannot defend themselves: teleportation. The image showed a group suddenly materializing deep within the base and behind enemy lines. We can insert a small assault team here and neutralize the Astri defenses, allowing us to make our final attack. I was about to follow the briefing. Talk of teleportation and orbital strike was clearly beyond my comprehension, but the basic strategy the alien described seemed solid. I still had one question. This all looks good on paper, but why do you need us? I asked. Uriel smiled through his slit-shaped mouth before responding. Our assault team will be heavily outnumbered when we teleport to the facility. We have the element of surprise on our side, but our projections predict that this will not be enough. Therefore, we need a distraction to divert the Astri forces away from the control room. The vast majority of prisoners held at the base are human. You two have already led a successful prisoner rebellion, and you can do it again. We ask that you free your people so that they can join the fight and defeat our mutual enemy. The alien paused before continuing. I know we're asking a lot of you, considering everything you've already suffered. He didn't even have a chance to finish his sentence before Natasha intervened. We will make, she said firmly. I looked at my companion in shock, surprised that she had committed us to this dangerous mission without even consulting me. But deep down, I knew she was right. We were the only ones who could carry out this part of the operation, and we had to go in to save our fellow humans. Now we were soldiers in this, and there was no turning back. The being called Uriel was present and appeared to preside over the meeting, but he was the only one of his kind present. The rest of the motley group included a werewolf-like creature with 6 eyes, the same breed I encountered during the rebellion. Next to the werewolf sat a small, stocky being, covered in thick brown hair and wide, wrong eyes, and most bizarre of all was a black eel-like creature contained in a 6-foot-long exoskeleton, as it presumably could not survive outside its natural aquatic environment. Our alien hosts provided us with electronic devices that we inserted into our ears, allowing us to understand what was being said and communicate with our new allies. Uriel opened the discussion by welcoming Natasha and me as he congratulated us on our victory aboard the Astri ship. Your successful rebellion dealt a blow to the enemy, but did not significantly reduce their ability to operate within your solar system. The problem is here. He tapped his long fingers on a control panel to reveal a holographic display in the center of the table. Suddenly, I saw a representation of a gas giant that I recognized as Jupiter, and noticed the smaller rocky satellites orbiting the planet, which were certainly its moons. Uriel zoomed in on one particular moon, a rock that was supposed to be uninhabited, but as the image became clearer, I noticed the ugly metal structure embedded in the moon's surface. The Astri Alpha facility, its operating base for this system, located on the moon that Earthlings call Europa. We recently deployed a substantial flotilla in an attempt to destroy this base, but Astro detected our attack and deployed countermeasures to destroy our fleet in orbit. We understand that Earth-based governments also made an attempt against the base using a diplomatic mission as cover for a biological attack. This operation also ended in failure, and human leaders on Earth have since submitted to the Astri pirates, paying homage to the enemy by handing over their own citizens for mutilation and... My jaw dropped when Natasha and I exchanged a look of shock and disgust. We had heard rumors of government complicity in Astri's atrocities, but now the terrible truth had been revealed. It is clear that another conventional attack will not be successful. Uriel continued. Therefore, we must resort to unconventional tactics. The holographic image suddenly changed, showing what I imagined to be a 3D image of the base's interior, revealing elevators, tunnels, and chambers deep below the moon's surface. Our allies take considerable risks to bring us these schemes. We have identified the command center that coordinates the base's orbital defense systems. If we neutralize this system, we will be able to attack the deep space facility with impunity. He paused to zoom in, focusing on a chamber located deep below the ground. This is our target. It can't be achieved in orbit, but we have a secret against which the Astri cannot defend themselves: teleportation. The image showed a group suddenly materializing deep within the base and behind enemy lines. We can insert a small assault team here and neutralize the Astri defenses, allowing us to make our final attack. I was about to follow the briefing. Talk of teleportation and orbital strike was clearly beyond my comprehension, but the basic strategy the alien described seemed solid. I still had one question. This all looks good on paper, but why do you need us? I asked. Uriel smiled through his slit-shaped mouth before responding. Our assault team will be heavily outnumbered when we teleport to the facility. We have the element of surprise on our side, but our projections predict that this will not be enough. Therefore, we need a distraction to divert the Astri forces away from the control room. The vast majority of prisoners held at the base are human. You two have already led a successful prisoner rebellion, and you can do it again. We ask that you free your people so that they can join the fight and defeat our mutual enemy. The alien paused before continuing. I know we're asking a lot of you, considering everything you've already suffered. He didn't even have a chance to finish his sentence before Natasha intervened. We will make, she said firmly. I looked at my companion in shock, surprised that she had committed us to this dangerous mission without even consulting me. But deep down, I knew she was right. We were the only ones who could carry out this part of the operation, and we had to go in to save our fellow humans. Now we were soldiers in this, and there was no turning back. Over the next few days, Natasha and I underwent intensive training in preparation for the attack. We weren't exactly newbies, as I was a combat veteran and Natasha had survived months of in the chambers from Astri. However, we had to learn to use advances of the Confederation and to fight effectively against the Astri. This was done through the use of full immersion VR technology, which literally placed us in a replica of Astro's moon base, where we had the opportunity to fight frighteningly realistic digital representations of enemy. It was after a particularly intense and exhausting training session that Uriel came to see me, addressing me as I removed my headset and equipment. "How is your training progressing?" the alien asked, his big dark eyes focused on me with a curious intensity. "Good," I repeated, not really knowing what else I could say. "The attack will begin tomorrow." Uriel suddenly said, "Our assessments show that you are as combat ready as possible. Unfortunately, there is no effective way to prepare it for teleportation. It is not a pleasant process, but I can assure you that the necessary safety protocols are in place." I swallowed hard in dismay, feeling cold terror course through my body as I considered the alien's words, but I maintained my tough stance, responding with typical bravado. "Well, I'm looking forward to the woman many Astri." Uriel produced what I believed to be a frown before asking his next question. "Do you have hatred for the enemy?" "Clear," I replied in surprise. "Didn't you see what they did to the prisoners?" "Yes, indeed," Uriel replied. "We document the atrocities committed as evidence against the Astri Empire. Unfortunately, these are scenes we witness across the galaxy as we take the fight to the enemy." "They are animals," I cried. "Worse than animals. Violence is the only language they understand." "Yes," Uriel said thoughtfully. "You were Astri's prisoner for only a short time, weren't you? Your mates suffered worse at their hands." I thought about Natasha and anger rose inside me. "You can say that again. They for months, your friends. You would understand if you had suffered what she suffered." For the first time, I noticed a flicker of emotion in the alien's eyes before he responded. "Astro, my entire family. They them one by one and made me watch." My jaw dropped. I was surprised by Uriel's admission and couldn't find the words to respond. Our enemy has committed many heinous acts, and it is easy to succumb to blind hatred while fighting them. But have you considered Astri's perspective? "What the hell do you mean?" I responded in dismay. "You want me to feel empathy for these power-hungry psychopaths?" "To effectively combat the enemy, we must first understand him." Uriel said calmly, "We have learned much from the few Astri prisoners who have fallen into our hands. Our neural technology has allowed us to monitor your brainwaves, even access your memories." He nodded at the headset I held in my hands. "If you allow me, I would like to share with you one last simulation before the mission. I believe you will find the experience useful in the battle to come." I was reluctant to comply, given how exhausted I was after the intense training of the last few days. However, I was intrigued and thought that whatever Uriel wanted to show me must be important. And then I nodded, putting my headset back on and connecting my equipment before being thrown into yet another virtual scenario. I found myself falling, the ground coming to me quickly. There was no time to do anything as I quickly descended from a height. But luckily, the thick vegetation cushioned my fall before I hit the forest floor with a heavy impact. Looking through the foliage, I saw a dropship hover briefly in the sky before moving on, slowly flying the horizon. I soon realized that I had fallen out of the plane, or more accurately, I had been thrown away like a piece of trash. My avatar was dropped into the middle of what looked like a rainforest, but that wasn't the strangest part. I looked at my hands and saw claws, and my torso was covered in red scales. To my horror, I realized that Uriel had placed me inside the body of an Astri. I had no idea why he did such a thing, but I figured that was what he wanted to show me. But something else was wrong. I wasn't a full-grown Astro like the 7-foot-tall I'd fought before. Instead, it seemed like I was a mere child, not fully developed. I felt small, vulnerable, and scared. Who would have thought that Astri could feel fear? I nervously explored my surroundings, walking on stumpy legs. The atmosphere was suffocating and the vegetation was thick. I heard the high-pitched buzzing of what I assumed were insects and used my claws to cut the foliage. It felt like I was in the middle of a jungle, but the plants and trees were strange and unfamiliar to me, multicolored and potentially. My progress was slow, but I finally managed to reach a clearing. Looking up at the sky, I was surprised to see two suns shining above me, one large, the second much smaller. I then realized that I was not on Earth, but on an alien planet. I wondered if this was the Astri homeworld, remembering how they once lived in a jungle environment. However, I didn't have much time to reflect on this as my attention was caught by movement near the tree line. I turned around, instinctively nervous as my instincts told me I was in danger. However, I let my guard down when I saw another child, Astri just like me, a red-scaled reptilian with fear in his eyes as he nervously emerged into the clearing. For a moment, I thought I had found a friend, but then I saw the crude spear in his claws, a homemade made from a tree branch with a sharp tip. The young Astro roared before charging at me, quickly closing the distance as he charged me with his spear. Reacting on instinct, discovering that my alien avatar had physical attributes far beyond my own. Waiting until the last possible moment, I ducked and avoided my enemy's attack by simultaneously attacking with the large claw of my right foot. I kicked the Astro in his arm, making the young man scream in pain, his dark falling to the grass below. The other Astrid looked at me, pain and anger in her yellow eyes as she prepared to launch a second attack. But suddenly all hell broke loose as the ground we were standing on began shaking violently before completely collapsing, throwing me to the ground. As I lay helpless in the grass, I witnessed a hole appear in the ground in front of me and watched as a massive creature emerged from its underground lair. He recoiled in horror at the sight of the monster, a huge spider-like being with a sharp stinger attached to its powerful tail. I crawled in a frantic attempt to escape, but luckily, I was not the beast's target. Instead, the predator went for another Astri, striking him before he had a chance to react and burying the stinger deep into his back. I watched in helpless horror as young Astri screamed and was dragged into the hole by the monster, still alive and facing what could only be a horrible fate. However, I didn't wait for the beast to return for a few seconds. Then I stood up on my clawed paws and ran as fast as my stumpy legs could carry me, heading what I naively thought was the safety of the forest. I don't know how long I ran, but I was exhausted and totally lost when I finally stopped, now finding myself deep in the alien jungle. I looked around and saw a ravine that ran down to a narrow river and heard screams of and sounds of pitched battle. I should have run, but I confess I was curious, opting to go down to the ravine to get a closer look. There I found a scene of anarchy, with a dozen or more young Astri fighting each other with claws and claws, improvised biting and while they tried the woman. I noticed how everyone was approximately the same age and size as my avatar. They were also a mix of men and women. Don't ask me how I could tell the difference, but somehow I could. Both the were just as cruel as each other, fighting for their lives as they spilled the of their compatriots on the forest floor. I was shocked and surprised for a while as I watched the happen, but I was brought back to reality when an Astri woman attacked me from behind, knocking me down. A brutal fight ensued as she viciously attacked me with her claws and teeth. I felt the pain of each blow and responded in kind, biting deeply into his exposed throat, the metallic taste of filling my mouth as my fangs bit into his dura. As soon as I removed my teeth, I saw the female Astri slowly bleeding to the on the ground with a fatal bite to his throat. Dazed and in shock, I staggered away from the battle and a small watering hole that led off the creek, a seemingly calm body of water where I hoped to find some respite. I moved closer to shore with the intention of drinking and washing my wounds, but my instincts failed me and I didn't see the dark shape below the waterline until it was too late. In an instant, a new horror emerged from the water, seizing me in its powerful jaws before I could react. Suddenly, I was beneath the surface, teeth sunk deep into my torso as my lungs filled with water. I felt immense pain and thought the beast was going to tear me in half. Instead, he spun me around in the water like a crocodile would do with its prey, and my pain became so great that I lost consciousness. I woke up some time later, coughing water from my lungs as I tried to sit up, but I staggered in agony. The beast almost bit me in two and I lost a lot, but somehow it was still alive and back on shore. But I knew I wasn't safe. I heard rustling in the bushes behind me and realized the predator was returning to finish what it had started. Fighting the pain, I prepared to defend myself. But then it was over. I took a deep breath, grabbing the headset and ripping it off my face. Looking down, I searched for wounds on my body, only to find that it was... Sweat was pouring from every pore and my head was throbbing. Everything I experienced felt so real, but it was just a simulation. And when I looked up, I saw Uriel watching me, his black, emotionless eyes observing my reactions with cold indifference. I angrily tore apart the various appendages on my body as I confronted my alien companion. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. "This was a digital representation of the first memories of a captured Astri," he responded dispassionately. "Why did you show me this?" I asked next. "To help you understand. Astri's education is not easy. They are taken from their mothers as soon as they can walk and thrown unceremoniously into the savage jungles, where they have to fight tooth and nail to survive. They are not allowed to return to civilization until they retain a fellow young Astri. Only 20 to 30% of Astri survives this brutal initiation, and this is just the beginning of her introduction into a world of merciless and endless violence." "My God!" I exclaimed, surprised by the brutal reality of Astri society. "Please remember this experience when you go into battle." Uriel continued. "The Astri may well be monsters, but they are also products of their environment. We cannot let hatred consume us, otherwise we will not be better than them." I nodded thoughtfully, finally understanding the message Uriel had conveyed so directly. The alien gave me a lot to think about, but my focus had to be surviving the coming fight. I can't even begin to understand the technology used to teleport our team to the enemy base. All I can say is that the process was horrible and not something I want to experience again. One moment I was in my combat gear and holding my aboard the Confederate ship and was suddenly engulfed in an all-encompassing light, temporarily blinding me and burning my skin. But the light and heat didn't just surround me. They entered me, crawling through my pores and deconstructing my fragile body from the inside out. I screamed in absolute terror as it seemed like my it was being torn into a million pieces. For a moment, everything went black, and it was the most terrifying feeling in the universe, because for a while my consciousness existed, but my physical body did not. I was stuck in the nothingness between point A and point B, and for one chilling moment, I believed I might be stuck in this hellish limbo forever. But fortunately, that didn't happen. The process of my rematerialization was equally horrible, as all my pieces were fused back into one, and the light disappeared as I found myself inside a dark tunnel. My head was still spinning, and I felt bile rising in my throat. To my shame, I vomited all over the metal walkway, passing out as my entire body shook. It was Natasha who came to my aid, placing a firm hand on my shoulder before helping me to my feet. Adjusting to the surroundings, I saw that our entire assault team had gone through the teleportation process. Our squad was really small, consisting of Natasha and I, Uriel, a werewolf we called Axel, and 3 lightning machines. War-automated machines that seemed to do most of the fighting within the Confederate military. I looked at Uriel and noticed how the alien wasn't carrying any. When I questioned him on this point, his response was typically philosophical and fatalistic. "I am a diplomat, not a soldier. I have a role to play in the fight to come. If the enemy takes my life, so be it." Our group was split into 2, with Uriel leading the group to the underground control room, while Natasha and I followed a single aerial view that led us through the winding tunnels to our objective. I looked at Natasha as we ran, noticing the dark look behind her eyes and knowing that she wanted to inflict brutal revenge on her enemy Astri. I saw hatred in his heart, and it terrified me. We finally reached the end of the last hallway and waited as our robotic drone forced open the door, revealing a vast chamber on the other side. I was hit by a familiar smell of dirty bodies and slow and scary. We slowly entered the chamber, looking at the masses of human prisoners contained in cages stacked to the ceiling. We stayed in the shadows, praying we wouldn't be detected before our task was completed. The machine war floating headed to a control station, where he began the process of deactivating the security system and releasing the prisoners, while Natasha and I maintained surveillance. The attack came like an unexpected bolt of lightning, with the Astri guard leaping at us with blind fury in his cruel yellow eyes. He attacked Natasha first, struggling and knocking her down before she had a chance to fire. A moment later, Astro was upon Natasha with his spear, war pointed at his throat. I reacted on pure instinct, pointing my weapon and pulling the trigger. A volley of needle-shaped shape passed through the red-scaled Astro, almost cutting it in two and throwing your body. I stepped, reaching out to pull Natasha up. "Are you well?" I exclaimed with concern. "I am fine," she replied firmly. "But those bastards must have heard the We're running out of time." As if on cue, sirens started blaring and red lights flashed. The base was now on alert. But luckily, our robotic guide finished his work and all the cage doors opened automatically, much to the shock and surprise of the emaciated prisoners in there. The first brave ones emerged, with a naked, thin, and heavily scarred man walking with us, a glimmer of hope visible in his red eyes. "You are human," he stuttered, almost in disbelief. "Are you here to rescue us?" Natasha responded by pulling one make from the belt and handing it to him. "You will need to fight for your freedom. Now is your chance for revenge." The freed prisoner smiled through chapped lips and eagerly accepted the blade. Others soon followed, breaking out of their cages one by one as they joined the resistance. Just then, a shuttered door at the other end of the chamber opened and two Astri guards emerged, opening fire with their as they advanced. Natasha and I returned fire as we ducked for cover, but the freed prisoners rushed like a human wave, screaming in frenzied fury as they threw themselves at the two Astri. The guards continued to several before being crushed, stabbed, and beaten by dozens of vengeful prisoners who literally tore their attackers to pieces. As Natasha and I watched, we were suddenly rocked by a powerful explosion below our feet. A moment later, we heard Uriel's monotone voice through our headphones as he said, "Central Command has been neutralized. Astri's orbital defenses have fallen. Reinforcements will be with us soon." I looked at Natasha and we exchanged a smile. And for the first time, I truly believed that we would win this fight. Reinforcements arrived soon after as Confederation ships entered Jupiter's orbit and several combat drones were deployed throughout the Astri base. It appeared that the enemy was completely unprepared for the attack and proved unable to defend the base when its security systems were shut down. There were pockets of resistance as the surviving fought frenzied battles against the robotic invaders, but their outposts were all gradually overrun. Meanwhile, Natasha and I lead a group of freed prisoners as we head deeper into the facility in search of other survivors. Natasha showed frightening zeal as she dispatched injured Astri soldiers, her eyes shining as she was shooting bullets in their limp bodies. It seemed that her desire for revenge had consumed her, and I began to fear that there was no way back for my friend. And Natasha's anger only grew as we descended deeper underground, navigating the dark, winding corridors and discovering new horrors and more evidence of the enemy's atrocities. In a vast chamber, we discovered a substantial amphitheater, a circular arena of seating facing what could only be described as a seating area. The floor covered in an offal that remained as a lasting reminder of the massacre that took place here. And it got worse. In the next level, we discover several artificial habitats containing wild alien beasts. In the first, there was a crocodile-like predator swimming in a tank of murky green water, greedily feasting on the severed limbs and various body parts of its many human victims. We then peered into an enclosure from a viewing platform above it, watching in horror and revulsion as dozens of small, spider-like creatures burst through the ribcage of a still-living man, feeding on his insides as he screamed in absolute agony and blind terror. But when Natasha and I reached the lowest level of that hellish facility, we encountered something we never could have predicted. The room we entered stood in contrast to the dark, shadowy metal corridors we had traveled through to get here. Instead of darkness, we were confronted by bright lights and white walls, entering what appeared to be a hospital and noticing the transparent, incubator-like cots lined up in rows of 3. And inside the incubators were babies, astry small, screaming reptiles with red scales, looking at us with their big yellow eyes. I remembered the time I spent in the virtual reality simulation and what Uriel told me about the young Astri, saying that they were thrown into battle as soon as they were old enough to walk. But these They looked like newborns, unable to take care of themselves and therefore still needed protection from a hostile universe. I stood in the doorway, stunned and surprised by this latest unexpected development. But Natasha didn't miss a beat, marching confidently into the room and heading to the nearest incubator. Before I had the chance to stop her, the woman raised her hand. "It is only one number." The bullet went through the transparent cover and exploded inside the girl's head. Child, her instantly in a horrible way. "Jesus!" I screamed in shock and dismay. "Why the hell did you do that?" Natasha simply shrugged her shoulders and replied in a matter-of-fact tone, "They are Astri, our enemy." "But they are just babies," I protested. "They are harmless. They can be babies now, but when they grow up, they will be of cold." Natasha replied, "I won't allow that to happen." She went to the next crib, lifting the once again. I heard the high-pitched screams of babies. Astri and I couldn't take it. As I remembered the time I spent in the simulation, I realized that the Astri were not born evil. They were turned into monsters, and they could not be blamed for the sins of their parents. I slowly raised my, pointing at my companion while speaking firmly. "Don't do that, Natasha. Lower your and go away." I saw the pain in her eyes as she looked at me and heard the raw anger in her voice as she spoke. "You damn traitor! It's them or us, don't you understand? This is a war of extermination!" I bent down, tightening my grip while repeating my order. "Lower the Natasha." "This," she shouted back. A second later, she a second child, Astri, and in an instant she turned around and I knew I would be her next target. I acted on pure instinct, pulling the trigger and feeling the kickback when he... The bullet went through Natasha's chest, propelling her body. I ran, reaching out to catch her as she fell, but it was too late. The spark disappeared from Natasha's eyes and her life force was extinguished. I cradled my comrade's corpse in my arms and almost went crazy with the screams of the baby's Astri as tears rolled down my face. And when I looked up, I saw the alien Uriel standing in the doorway, a hint of sympathy now apparent in his large black eyes as he surveyed the scene. He didn't say a word to me. What was left to say? The battle is over, but was the high price we paid for victory worth it? That's the question I continue to ask myself as I record this message for broadcast. However, I am here to tell you that the threat that few on Earth knew existed has been eliminated, at least for now. Astro's base on the moon Europa is now in the hands of the Galactic Confederation, and therefore the enemy will not be able to abduct humans for the first time in generations. Thousands of lives were surely saved, but the war is far from over. The Astri Empire is still powerful and dangerous, and there is no guarantee that its forces will not return to our solar system. Denial and complacency are no longer an option in a universe full of threats. And if our governments are not prepared for this fight, we will need new leaders. But this is a matter for the citizens of Earth. I won't be returning to my home planet, at least not for a long time. My fellow survivors and I have joined the forces of the Confederation and will continue the fight against the Astri Empire in every corner of the galaxy. But I will never forget Uriel's lesson. We do not lower ourselves to their level, and we will never lose our humanity. There will be no victory parades for our unknown army, no statues or celebration. But for those who are listening, please remember us and know that we are fighting and for your freedom.